I think we all know and everyone knows and loves Scott Tinker, involved in the industry, and he's been an advocate for a sensible dialogue on energy for the last 20 plus years. Dr. Tinker today will be speaking about seeking energy truth. And I think this gets to one of his primary themes, which is you can be completely factual, but not be factually complete. And a lot of times in the energy dialogue, we get little snippets that sound like, oh, that's a beautiful silver bullet that will save us all. But when you look at it in a factually complete sense, it doesn't really save us. It also creates other problems, which is another one of his themes, which is that there are no silver bullet solutions, that all energy involves trade-offs. So for those of you who don't know, Dr. Tinker is the Director Emeritus of the Bureau of Economic Geology. He just earlier this year has gone down to part-time, and he's no longer the director. They're looking for someone to replace him, which of course will be impossible. Dr. Tinker is the Director Emeritus of the Texas Bureau of Economic Geology. He's also the chairman of Switch Energy Alliance, and he's also the CEO of a new LLC he just started, which is Tinker Energy Associates. Dr. Tinker has been president of the American Geoscience Institute, the American Association of State Geologists, the American Association of Petroleum Geologists, and also president of the Gulf Coast Association of Geological Societies. He's also produced famous films such as Switch On, and also a short video called Energy Makes Our World. And he also gave a TED Talk called The Dual Challenge, Energy and the Environment. I want to point everyone to his webpage, his organization called switchon.org, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that goes out and takes the message about how we need energy diversity to the public. And diversity of energy supply and security of energy supply, and the fact that there really are no such things as like perpetual energy, like so-called renewables that will last forever and never wear out and things like that, or that have no pollution.
Well, it's good to see everybody. I don't know, I was down at the Museum of Natural Science last night, and if you were there, some of these slides you'll recognize. I didn't make a whole new talk for today, but quite a bit of new stuff in here too. One other thing, there's guys working on the roof today, of course, cue the people on the roof. So if anybody falls behind me, let me know. I can't see them because I need to go out there and save them. They're running around. Anyway, it's nice to see everybody for this talk. And I'm going to start with this thought about data. We got to use it to tell the truth, not to call to action, no matter how noble the intentions. Beautiful book. If you haven't read Factfulness, just take the time. It's well worth the read. So I'm start with this question really is, how do we reduce global emissions and advance human flourishing? And it's a dual challenge, as Bill mentioned. And we really have to, I'm not saying net zero emissions or zero, just reduction of emissions and advancing flourishing, not ending poverty, but advancing flourishing. And it's an and, right? We have to do both. We simply can't leave one or the other of those things behind. And with that, there are always trade-offs. So we love these ternary diagrams. I don't have to explain this to a geologist. Let's pretend everything has to sum to 100% here. We like our secure energy. We want it affordable. We want economic security. We want it reliable. We want low emissions, environmental security. And the problem is it's tough to have it all. Kind of like life, there are trade-offs. If you want 100% low emissions, you don't get anything of the other two. They balance here in the middle more, and they vary by region, of course, these trade-offs, and I call it the radical middle. It's that attempt to try to find those trade-offs and those solutions that are actually functional and work. Another way to think about this is energy security underpinning economic security. The world's leading economies have reasonably secure energy, maybe getting a little less so. And then economic security allows us to invest in the environment. We're going to talk about this and show some data. And again, there's your radical middle. So when you go out and look at the world by per capita income, there's a tremendous amount of disparity, as we know. The yellows are the poorest. They're everywhere, but concentrated. If you look at the world's least livable cities, I've plotted them here. It's where it's yellow and red for the most part. And the most livable cities, the blue is where it's rich. Blue on blue. So these emerging economies, the ones that are just getting started, are spread globally, but concentrated subequatorially, living in energy poverty, and they need something affordable to get started. As you start to move up the developing world in the reds and the purples, they have some secure energy, but it's not totally secure to them. It comes and goes. Okay. And it that's not just the electricity, fuels, et cetera. So they need reliable energy. Turns out this is a big part of the world. About 5 billion people, 60% of the world live in some level of energy poverty today. And I've written about this and blah, blah, blah. This was back, I forget where I put this out, but and then the developed world, us, the rich world in blue. Again, we're talking about climate security, want energy to be clean. And here we sit with these various challenges. Clean means different things to different people. I would say mostly in the rich world, it means climate, low emissions. But if you think about clean air, the stuff we breathe, it's cleanest in these green countries where it's rich and the yellow. And it gets dirtier as it gets oranges and reds, and that's where it's poor. Again, simply can't afford to clean it up. They have different priorities, and they don't have the healthy economies to do that. So you bring all that together and you realize that secure energy varies across the globe, and I will call this a truth. Now, look, there's 3 kinds of people in the world. Those who are good at math and those who aren't. And most of us aren't, but here's some simple arithmetic. This is what a human being consumes in these countries. And we made a film called Switch On energy poverty, filmed in Kenya and Ethiopia and other places. And of course, my fridge, and you've undoubtedly seen this analogy or similar ones. If I've moved to the woodlands and we have a couple of fridges now, one's in the garage where it's really efficient, and I smile, but not really when I say I probably consume more than 30 human beings in refrigeration alone here in Houston. And that's energy poverty. So the truth is energy is vital for human flourishing. We simply can't flourish without access to energy. I've been around the world quite a bit, been very fortunate. These are the countries color-coded by number of visits, and met a lot of people. As Bill mentioned, we made a couple of films, Switch and Switch On. Switch came out, released it in 12, filmed in 09 and 10. But pretty much kind of on this thing called the transition. It was ahead of its time. I realized there wasn't one yet. And Switch On energy poverty. So a lot of these pictures come from or are taken while filming. This is a man in Ethiopia about my age who he was crying when he told me his kids and grandkids and great grandkids had come out of the bush and they were in school for the first time. They'd never been in schools. If you go over to Nepal and meet Sanakanchi, you'll see this in our film, cooking indoors with biomass, in this case wood. We went to the SETI Memorial Hospital nearby, and a pretty tough part of the film. Watch kids die from breathing indoor smoke, pneumonia, and moms with cataracts issues and cancers, etc. There are 3 million people dying every year still from breathing indoor smoke and cooking indoors with wood. So this is a very solvable problem. Back in Africa and Kibra outside of Nairobi, this is a church that doubles as a school, a couple of light bulbs dangling for the first time so they can actually go into the evenings, and these kids in uniforms. I remember taking this picture, big zoom. The garbage was piled way up the hill. Polluted water, polluted soil. Again, can't afford to clean it up, but they're going to school. In Vietnam, we meet Thon in that red shack, and she lives there with her crippled son and carries him on her back every day across this plank, which I walked on, and wasn't real stable. So he can go to a school. This theme over and over in the poorest countries of trying to get education in India, some of the most severe poverty I've ever seen, and wealth, of course, a huge disparity there. And finally, coming back to the Western Hemisphere in the village of Ganchukwa, they are Wako indigenous people in Colombia. In fact, I'm going down for a AAPG geoscience event in Colombia at the end of May, in Santa Marta, quite near here. They're living in mud huts and thatch roofs still, and we brought First Solar. There's the array on the left. Not big, it was 3.5 kilowatt, half of a home here in Houston. But it put light bulbs in these huts and some ceiling fans in the main community hut and a refrigerator. So they began to see one another at night for the first time, but their kids, and here are some of them, will die. The average age is still under 50 there, and the kids, half of them will die before they become adults. And we saw it, diarrhea and infections and things you just don't have the medicines for. So with a mama or a chief that night, we clicked that light on for the first time. It was really a pretty powerful moment when they saw each other in their own village at nighttime. So here we sit in this world, and I'm not going to dive into ESG. We've seen what it has done in the more modern definitions of it, but it matters here. The environment does matter, the soil, the water, the air, the local air, the social, the ability to have some schooling or maybe a little bit of healthcare and governance, a lot of immigration, migration away from poverty and autocrats. So ESG matters in the real world. Let's not leave it behind. So, and I'd say there's a remarkable amount of optimism and hope in the people that I've met and have read about. They see their future in front of them and are hopeful that it is improving. And I worry about the pessimism and the fear that exists in the US and Western Europe, particularly in young people. And they're protesting, and I admire their passion, protesting capitalism and democracy and other things, the very thing that allows them to protest in many ways, or at least enables it. I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm just saying the fear is real. And a lot of the passion is placed on things that aren't necessarily going to address issues. And then we have bigger protests from different communities now in the modern rich world. The farmers are protesting across Europe and the US and Canada. It doesn't get reported as much. So you create this division. We're creating division and fear here. And that is not a good trend. So it creates this paradox. Energy won't end poverty, but we can't end poverty without energy. And that's the great global challenge, I think, is powering the people, getting energy access for all, and continuing to grow that access. So, we cooked with wood back in the day, 10,000 years ago, and the sun was the first form of energy. It grew the hay that powered our vehicles, and we captured the motion of wind and water and did useful work with them. Built bigger dams and got oil from whales and lit our homes, and this is the old energy of the world. And along came coal, which nature, as we know, made dense, and you could burn it, boil water, make steam, turn a turbine, and run a generator, and make light. And that has changed the modern or the rich world. Liquid hydrocarbons that we refine and put in our vehicles, and CH4, methane, and nuclear, uranium, and thorium, that's the new energy. And yet we still have Sanakanchi cooking indoors with wood like we were doing thousands of years ago. And 2.8 billion of us still in this rich world of ours. So I show you this because it's the concept that I communicate everywhere and at universities as well, energy density. In this case, I'm showing specific energy or energy by weight, joules per kilogram. And you can see nuclear is just a million times denser. This is a log scale on the left than everything else by weight. And through time, we've gone from dung to nuclear. And I put batteries on here because they are a lot less dense than dung. It turns out you can't even see the density of a battery by weight. Now, it's not judgment. This is physics. This is just the reality of things. If we get rid of nuclear, and we know this, dense energy drives modern societies. Now, you can't measure everything by weight. So when you look at, take the nuclear out, SOx and NOx particulates, mercury, etc. Natural gas is denser by weight than coal and oil and dung and wood and batteries. And there are a lot less real pollutants in natural gas and these other things as well. So that's a good trend. Where do hydro, geothermal, wind, and solar fit? You can't weigh them that way. They fit somewhere down here. And this is when Václav Smil came up with a different way to look at density. He called it surface power density, or energy by area, watts per meter squared. And you can kind of get a feel now for what that looks like. And there are calculations and assumptions in all of these numbers, always are. But it's just hundreds of times denser, and the more to the right there on your screen. So we call it renewable and thermal. We call it clean and dirty. That's what your kids learn. Judgmental, but industry's created its own terms: intermittent and reliable, and weather dependent and firm. So all forms of truth. I'm using electrons and molecules here. The stuff on the left mostly makes electricity, which you can make with molecules, and we do by burning them, but you need those molecules for lots of other things. A lot of heat to make cement and steel. You can arc nuclear and make cement and steel. There's so-called green steel coming, but we'll see. These things are just much harder to accomplish. And you have to have molecules for fertilizers, ammonia, plastics, and other things. So the truth is we need electricity and molecules. We'll never get rid of one or the other. Electrify everything is a fun little mantra, but it's not realistic. And nothing is black and white. And I'm showing you this sort of heavy gray and white thing because, you know, it's black and white, right? Well, watch close. No, it's actually just all the same shade of gray. And it wasn't a trick. I'll remove that for you. It's just the same shade of gray. Our eyes play tricks, and quite often so did the data and the scale of things. The world is gray. And in that world, we got to strive to be completely factual, which we are pretty good at, but also factually complete, which we're terrible at. And I'm not great at it either. I try. Factual completeness is very hard. I said that under testimony to the US Senate. So here's some example of that. Coal and oil in the world, this is actual consumption in exajoules. Think of it in TCFs for the scale if you want to. They're almost the same. So by energy type, coal and oil are still going up. They're very dense, as you've seen, but they make a lot of CO2 when we burn them. We know that. And natural gas is growing tremendously. And nuclear actually is a little bit again as well. Dense, less CO2. And then hydro and everything else are going up quite a bit. They're not dense, but they don't make much CO2. The trade-offs. And by the way, the scale on the right that's all my graphs are color-coded. I was raised in the oil business. I think green is still oil and red is still gas. So let's go with that. Here are the trade-offs, okay? And you can see the Great Recession of '09 in the global data. We don't move around as much in recessions or do as much in terms of industry. So there's a dimple in demand. And here's the recession related to shutting down the world's economy during COVID. Deeper, but we're back. We're already consuming more energy than we ever have in the past as a world. COVID didn't change anything like that structurally. Now we consume more coal and oil than everything else combined by a lot. Look at the two bars there, a huge difference. And the truth is no source has gone down, nothing. We just keep adding wedges of new energy. It's energy addition. Talking about this for quite a while. I see a lot of people are talking about it now as well. Nothing's gone down. Okay. So it's also true in these data that solar and wind are the fastest growing. That's a rate. Here they are, exponential growth still. They're starting to go linear. All resources do that, by the way. If you survive, you go exponential, linear, then you're roll over. It's the great S curve of energy or resources. But solar and wind are still growing very fast. That's the rate. To make it, you know, factually complete, we put it back into the data, and there they are as part of the global data. So solar and wind represent about 10% of the growth in energy demand since they started, of the growth, not the base. It's just that we consume a tremendous amount of energy. The energy demand is growing faster than solar and wind by a lot. So when we think about these things, global energy, and this is an odd way to look at this. This is an IEA graph. It's not really the fundamental forms. Some of them are oil, gas, coal, but they also put electricity in here, which you have to make. The point is, electricity is only about a fifth or 21% of our total energy consumption. It's important. A lot of people think of electricity much bigger than that. In electricity itself, almost 2/3 is made by coal and gas still in the world, and another big chunk, nuclear and hydro, and then the remaining 12% from solar and wind and various forms of biomass. So 12% times 21%, here's your arithmetic, about 2.5% of non-hydro renewables. So this is the global energy scene, if you will, in that range. Now, I put some data together that show wind, solar, geothermal, and biomass in some of the big consuming economies. Here's the United States, and we've been growing our solar and wind a lot since 2010. Very impressive. Europe is ahead of us in terms of absolute generation. This is terawatt hours. It's not capacity. This is generation. I always try to show what we're actually doing, not what we have the capacity to do. And then China, it passed us. China blown by us. More solar and wind than the US and Europe. And India is just getting started. So this is all completely factual. China leads in solar and wind. When you hear that statement, it's true in terms of generation from solar and wind. And there it is. Now, when I scale that down and look at China's total electricity consumption, it sits up here. So the solar and wind component of that is about 20%, 25 or so, and geothermal biomass, and the rest is coal, nuclear, hydro, natural gas. So China is doing a lot there as well. And now here's China's total electricity. We're going to scale that down and take a look at China's total energy consumption. Remember, electricity is about 20%, plus or minus, depending on where you are in the world. So when you do that, you get a pretty good feel for the growth of energy demand in China and total energy and the component that's been satisfied by solar, wind, geothermal, and biomass. Not much, a little bit of the growth, not even the base. And the other important thing is to look at this thing, which is the total electricity consumption in the world in yellow. China consumes more energy than all the world's electricity combined, including their own. And this is just the reality of scale. So we got to always balance these things we hear in the media and politically and everywhere with what the data are teaching us. Scale, scale, scale. You know what this is? It's not a fire on a plane. When you zoom in a little bit, it's actually fungus on skin. It's pretty disgusting. How about this? It's not the inside of a neat art museum. It's actually the inside of a guitar. So scale, 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 when you get the perspective. This is not the surface of the Death Star. It's Cairo, Egypt. You talk about density. Several cities that live this way. And finally, this one I kind of like. It looks like a ship trapped in ice. Well, actually, when you zoom in, you can see two screws. It's an antenna broken off in a windshield. So scale matters, and our eyes and our minds have trouble sometimes rectifying these things. So here's some scale for you. China, energy consumption, consumes more coal than all the other energy combined. And it's not slowing down. It's continuing at a frenzied pace, 20 gigawatts, about a coal power plant a week still in China. Pledged to strictly control it, and they're not. Why? Because they also pledged to lift their economy up by making electricity cheap for industry and manufacturing. And that leads, okay, that's the important piece of that pledge. When I lay India on top of China, again, about the same population, India is a little more populated now. A year ago, they passed China. And scale that, however, down to be the same proportional energy now, are scaled the same. India, similar number of people, but consuming a quarter of the energy of China today. And why? Because China's GDP per person is way ahead of India's. Here's the data. India wants to do what China has done. So we go back to this graph and say, well, where's India relative to China? We're going to slide it to the left, watch close a quarter of a century. And, it looks pretty familiar. It's on literally the same slope that China was. And if they do what China has done with coal, the atmosphere is going to have a lot more CO2 in it. Okay. And maybe nuclear, maybe nat gas, solar, wind, other optionality for this would be really important for India, particularly nuclear. But India is building on coal. The output grows at the fastest pace for power fueled by coal. And the Modi's very clear. You actually lectured the G20. Don't tell us about climate change. You did it. US, you built on coal, UK, Germany, China. So this has been very clearly communicated. Coal hit a high last year, record high ever. China and India were driving that demand. Now, they're not alone in that. So let's look at nuclear in India and China. They're actually building new nuclear. 6 plants in India under construction, 6 gigs, and about 22 plants in China of new nuclear. And here's the coal in India. It's 5x coal to nuclear. Again, this is the capacity. This isn't the generation yet. And China's coal looks like this, 136 gigs. That's a lot. That's 136 coal power plant, under construction in China, 6 times the nuclear. Well, here's China's installed wind that's being built, 75,000 megawatts. That's 2 times Texas's total wind that's installed so far. They built it in 1 year. So I want to get you a feel for scale here. They built 2 times Texas total wind, and we have more wind in Texas than anybody, any state by a lot. And then here's the solar that's being built in China. It's a remarkable number, 216 gigawatts of solar in 2023. So when you hear China's leading in solar and wind, absolutely true. They're building a tremendous amount. Again, this is capacity. Now we got to put capacity factors on this, and I'll use average ones because the wind isn't always blowing and the sun's not always shining and the coal plants aren't always running. So when I scale these back through capacity factors, they look like this. Makes it more factually complete. But still, you add up solar and wind in China and it's almost as much as coal, but it's still not catching coal. So these are the data that are so important to understand. Yogi taught us that if the world was perfect, it wouldn't be. So in this imperfect world of ours, we see the global coal looks like this. Rich world, we've cut our coal consumption in half. Asia has gone way up, and the rest of the world doesn't use much coal. They don't have it, they don't use it. So, and it's not just China and India. Pakistan is quadrupling coal, and Bangladesh, and we take you to Vietnam in our second film and show you the whole coal operation there, et cetera. That long, prosperous life despite energy transition. It's just surprising some reporters apparently and some think tanks who called for the death of coal every year since I can recall, but it's just not going away yet. It's an Asian story until you don't get gas from Russia, and then Germany ramped up its coal. They needed the secure electricity, ramped up coal, and at the same time shut down their last 3 nuclear power plants. Climate scientists were aghast and should be. You know, it's just nuts land to do that when they're a green thinking economy. So the point of this is leaders prioritize energy security over climate security. When you look at what leaders in the world do, not what they say, they're prioritizing energy security every single time over climate security. Now, coming in out of coal into natural gas, this is the regions of the world. This is our consumption. North America consumes the most gas. This is the production in those same regions. There's 2 regions in the world that consume more than they produce, Asia and Europe, okay? And they don't have gas reserves in Europe. They're not exploring for it. They have resource, no reserves. And so they import a lot of LNG in China as well. So they need options to gas. And as a result, for example, in Europe, power sector only, remember that's about 30% of the energy in Europe, bringing down coal, bringing down gas, bringing down nuclear, bringing down hydro, and growing the solar and wind and other renewable so-called sector. And that started back in 07. Electricity demand in Europe went flat about 07. Now, this isn't all good. There's some good to that, efficiency and using less, but also not manufacturing as much. That can be a sign of strain in an economy. Here's the mixes, about a third fossil, nuclear, and hydro, and then the rest. So that's a pretty healthy mix on the right. It's healthier than on the left. There's more options in it. But it's policy. It's not Ukraine. Ukraine didn't cause this mix to happen. Policy started it way earlier than that. And it's expensive. Look, 60 cents a kilowatt hour in the summertime, that's 4 to 5x, 400 to 500% more than we pay in Texas. All right. And so, yeah, well, solar and wind are cheaper, Scott. Everybody's telling us that. Again, completely factual, but it's a number at the plant gate where the electricity is generated, the levelized cost of energy, if you will, but not to you. To get it to you means you have to have something there when the sun isn't out and the wind is blowing. And that something's expensive. So making it reliable is expensive. And people are starting to tell the truth on these things now. This is, CEO of Orsted had a big win to saying consumers are going to have to pay more for renewable energy. Europe isn't profitable. Solar warns of hurdles to the tech drive. Wind in a moment of reckoning as stocks fall and earnings crumble. Solar panel manufacturers ask for emergency support. And this it impacts industry. I have a million of these headlines. Higher Michelin announces closure of Germany. Volkswagen is going to reduce headcount. High energy bills, German industry to high production abroad. These are real impacts. So the truth is nations need secure energy, and they will get it. But the reality is when Germany's not importing gas from Russia, they're importing electricity from somewhere else or ramping up coal to keep it reasonably secure. And a lot of Europe is challenged, Western Europe particularly this way. Now, watch closely as we take this European graph and lay the US right on top of it, same scale. So I'll do that again. We consume a little more electricity, but we went flat in 07 as well here. But the mix on the right is quite different. You can see we have a lot of natural gas in our mix. And thanks to the hydraulic fractures of the world, started making it cheap back in about 07, 08. And we all know that story. So I was at CERAWeek and heard Gates's talk here when he said, look, the tech sector can't find enough electricity. They're literally having to come to terms and go public with the reality that they're the largest consumers of electricity of any industry by far. And part of that is AI and clean tech and cryptocurrencies and other things that are just driving electricity demand up again. And there's a lot of worry about this. So let's not be too sanguine, however, and this is data from the Bureau, the TORA project. Some of you may be supporting that and love to have your support. The Bureau always appreciates people joining those consortia so we can do this work. But shale gas, here's the shale gas from gas basins only, and here's the gas that comes out of the oil basins, and then here's conventional gas. And you put all that together and it is up and to the right, and we can feel pretty good about ourselves for a while. But as you start to parse that down a little more, you see conventional gas has kind of come down for a while, plateauing a little bit. 3 of the big gas basins have rolled over, the Barnett, Fayetteville, and the Utica. And even some of the gas from oil basins are plateauing. You can see the huge drop during COVID, of course, but kind of coming back for gas, not completely. There's only 3 of these big basins that are still up and to the right. Haynesville had the second hump, which many of us forecast. Marcellus, of course, and then gas out of the Permian. So that's very healthy, but that's 3 out of 10 basins. We've done these studies like it's the most detailed of any studies like them publicly for sure. And every one of these basins built cellular models, collected every well, every producing well, in this case by square mile. So it's really powerful stuff. But this is a summary of that 15 years of work on one slide. This shows you the technically recoverable resource scaled by size in each of these basins. Red being gas, green oil, and yellow is what's been produced so far of the TRR. So, and that's the number of wells drilled in the gray box to do that. So, about 20% of the Barnett has been produced, 43% of the Fayetteville, this is maybe 6 months ago, Haynesville, 10%, and then the Marcellus, 9%. So a lot of resource or technically recoverable reserves still there from the production. Moving into the oilier basins, 19% produced in the Bakken, 32% out of the Eagle Ford, Anadarko 9%, Niobrara 20%, then the Midland Basin and the Delaware Basin, kind of just getting started. So fairly neat looking numbers. It shows, if you add all that up, almost 500 billion barrels of equivalent of TRR, of which we've produced about 12%. So a lot of TRR left to go get. It's harder, as you know, and that's not the total resource. The total resource is much bigger than that. A lot of upside, but let's not get too sanguine about all this. You see the shapes of those curves. We're producing about 11 to 12 billion barrels a year. And if you do the math on that, it's about 40 years of TRR if you could get it all. And that time will go quickly. So we need infrastructure. We need pipelines built. This is transmission lines. If we're going to go down this electricity path, we got to build a lot more transmission lines. Well, we're not. Here's the data. We're building less transmission lines. And this so-called, IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, I stumbled to even say those words, but look, it called on building 4,000 miles of 100 kilovolt lines, and then more every year, and this is what we're actually building. So that's not happening. I think let's wrap our arms around one another, and we need more pipelines and more transmission lines. This is the cost of electricity in the US. I showed you in Europe. This is the top 12 most expensive states for electricity. And just for giggles, here's how they voted in the 2020 election. I didn't make this up. Alaska went red in the last presidential election, but it's not all because of solar and wind, but there are a lot of things that go on in Europe and here, policies and physics. Of course, you can't negotiate with physics, and taxes, quite a bit of taxes. So, Connecticut up there at 30 cents, California 30 cents a kilowatt hour. That's causing a big impact on manufacturing and industry and other things in those states. So what's wanted is not the will to believe, but the will to find out. which is the exact opposite. I love this thought. And you as scientists, you go find out. We need to. Coming back to the oil side, then you see the largest consumption is in Asia and on down, and then here's the production. And again, only 2 regions consuming a lot more oil than they produce. They don't have high reserves. They're importing a lot of oil, and they need options to oil. I get it. So here comes your electric car. It says it on the license plate there, electrons, and it's charging with diesel. These are diesel generators making electricity to charge an inefficient battery. Now look, it's in the remote outback of Australia, so it's not representative. It's just funny. But here's what is representative. This shows the number, kind of percentage of electric vehicles in the mix that were sold through time. I think 2023 is going to end up being lower than that, probably around 15%, which is still a lot. Now, the big question, and you know the answer to this, we just looked at the data, who needs options? China and Europe. And by the way, China's are charged with coal. You've seen the data, dominates their electricity sector. And Europe. This is where the EVs are sold. And here's the US and the rest of the world, 85% in China and Europe. So not even Asia broadly, China and Europe, 85% of the EVs. And that's about 40 million vehicles sold so far. So you take that 40 million, and we're going to have charging station if the growth continues like this. I don't know how many. Didn't have any accurate numbers, just made this one up. Studies showing accurate numbers aren't any more useful than the ones you make up. How many studies show that? 87. So let's just make up a number. We're going to electrify half of the world's vehicle fleet by 2040. And this is what's actually out there. So half of 1.4 billion by 2040. And by the way, a vehicle isn't a car. It can be a scooter. It can be a 2-wheeler, 3-wheeler, a car, etc. Anything with a battery and a motor that moves. So there it is. It's going to take about 300 million charging stations to electrify 700 million vehicles. There's our 40 heading up to 700 million. This is just a remarkable potential growth rate. And it's not just the charging stations. That's a Tesla S a few years ago. It has 7,100 batteries. You can see each cell there, like your cell phone. So if I do some simple math, 700 million, half the fleet times 5,000 batteries per vehicle, it's 3.5 trillion batteries. It's just, and they wear out. It's an unimaginable number of batteries, and you have to keep making them over and over. So there's reasons that people are thinking twice on the EVs. The Germans are, Kia boss cooling off. Kia says, not viable. Ford is losing a lot of money per vehicle. Robert Bryce put that out recently, $60,000 per truck lost on their Lightning. Italy leads the revolt against EVs. Volkswagen warns that nobody wants one. 2% of drivers would buy one in the near future. Ford halts work on a battery plant. Tesla shares tumble. This is last fall, and of course they announced layoffs last week. Honda and GM are scrapping plans to make cheaper EVs. No one wants to buy a used one because of the gravity issue, mostly the battery, issue. So you got to replace that at some point in time. And then a new report out. I messed that up. Anyway, they're showing that I'm gonna just fix that real quick. Sorry, so we can actually see the thing. Yeah, I guess I'm not. They're showing that the CO2 emissions from these cars they cross over somewhere depending on where they're built and where the stuff comes from. But it takes many years before the emissions from an EV actually become less than the lifetime emissions from a combustion engine. It's an important study that just came out. And then I throw this in there for gratuitous reasons. It's whatever. It's just funny, but I wouldn't want to be in one. The reason we can't put batteries into the hold of an airplane, lithium ion ones. So all this stuff that on the right, the metals, it comes from somewhere, right? And it turns out it takes about 600% more metal to build a EV than a combustion engine. And there's the different metals. And it's not the car, it's in the fuel, in the battery. And I love the license plates. Send me them if you see funny ones. Here's the EV in Colorado, ex-polluter, who doesn't think that mining, I guess, impacts the environment. We as geologists don't mind mining, but it's not green. And of course, I took this in Michigan, kilowatt on the license plate of the Tesla, because it just takes a kilowatt of electricity. Kilograms per megawatt for EV power generation. You know, it's 500%, solar and wind are 500% more mineral intensive than conventional fuels. So to make solar panels and wind turbines takes a lot more metal than coal and natural gas. Again, it's not judgment, it's just the physics of it that go into making these big low density energy collectors. So in Alberta, Canada, I was last week, coal powered right on the Tesla. They know where it comes from, at least, and the Lambo doesn't give a crap. It says CO2 on the license plate. So, yeah, I guess move on for them. And it comes from countries. The United States is still in the top 3 producing countries for oil and gas. Won't always be. We don't have the equivalent resource, but we're doing a wonderful job what we have. And here's the top 3 extracting countries for each of these key metals for panels, turbines, and batteries. And here's where it's processed. Okay, China processes brilliantly, has bought through Belt and Roads and other investment initiatives, and bought the processing to all these metals. Who needs it? China. Who needs options? China. So they've done a very nice job, and it's not just these, graphite as well for the EV batteries and lithium, half of the mines on the market. This is, you know, these are known. So here's the kind of the supply chain, if you will, for batteries, the raw materials, where they come from. China has quite a few, but here's where they're processed and the components are made and the assemblies are done. Asia, China and the rest of Asia, the red and the pink, just dominate this. So we're going to be moving the fuel for our cars from an OPEC world with us to an Asia world dominated by China. And we better be aware that we're doing that. And what are we doing about it in the US? Well, we're not mining. You know, those of you familiar with California, they're not going to produce the Salton Sea, although they're going to mandate EVs. And Maine has some of the largest lithium deposits in the country now in spodumene, and you can't dig it up, but they're going to mandate EVs. So the number of states proposing EV continues to grow, yet we won't produce the very metals that are needed for those batteries. And this is the great irony. And it's not just solar, wind, and batteries, the so-called war minerals. Look at them on the left. Here's the top production of these. 8 of the 13 are in China. Okay, gallium, vanadium, the rare earths, you know about those, etc. Titanium, war minerals. So China controls the supply chains, solar, wind, batteries, and the so-called war minerals. That's the truth, and we better be pretty well aware of that. So what are our options? Look, little vehicles, electrify them, or hybrids. Shorter distances, less weight in the battery, cities, but as they get bigger, you're hauling more battery weight. Fuel cells, I like getting back to hydrogen thought, or compressed natural gas, and then liquids in the bigger vehicles. This, the density matters as you're flying, or big ships, or big trucks, or rockets, etc. So you know, those of you, us who've lived in Colorado, no oil on the license plate, whatever, no tires, no plastics or electronics or knowledge. I may as well just say I love mining on there, because Colorado is a proud mining state. And I'm smiling when I say this, but not really, because Colorado just, you know, recently had in one of their Senate committees to ban oil and gas drilling. And so our government seems to want to do that as well. Treasury's handing out bags of cash now when you want to buy one. And the recent announcement in the administration expanding EVs, and a lot of wiggle words around this, but this all goes through. It's going to make combustion engines pretty tough to get, at least new. And I put out a piece saying, you know, reducing options doesn't work. Just ask Europe and the US. We need options in energy. So it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Let's have civil dialogue. Let's entertain thoughts. The environment in our world is precious and critical. We only have one, and it's all one system. We understand that. It's all tied together. And these forms of energy, from biofuels all the way over to the most dense nuclear, they impact the environment. You have to grow the biofuels, the carbohydrates, the plants, and do all sorts of things to turn it into a liquid before you burn it. It isn't clean. And solar and wind and batteries, you have to do all these things. I mean, these solar panels, where do they go when they wear it? We're dumping them in landfills, okay? And they do wear out. This is a catastrophic hailstorm. That's not the one that hit Houston, which was even bigger. But they wear out on their own. And lithium mines, this is the surface stuff there. You can see it from space. And the footprint of one wind turbine, a remarkable amount of rebar made with heat, and it'll be filled with concrete. So, and the wind turbine blades, they wear out too. Up in Wyoming, they cut them into thirds, they're burying them. And here's Sweetwater, Texas. We have the most wind. I mean, there's just a phenomenal pileup of wind turbine blades happening now that will be buried kind of quietly. And then the coal, oil, and gas business, of course, it's does all these things. You know, you mine for the metals to make the stuff to extract it, drill for it, refine it, move it, and burn it. You know, coal mines are remarkably big things, or on mountains. This is open pit. Coal power plants have a whole lot of environmental impact. Hydraulic fracturing and nuclear waste disposal, and or actually this is processing, reprocessing in France, but most of the world doesn't do that. So here we sit with all these things when it comes from the earth and we make it into collection systems and we dump it back into the earth or the atmosphere, it's not renewable. And Bill mentioned, I said this in a TED talk to 1,100 students. And I'm still alive and talking to you, going to another university next week, but there's no renewable energy. You know, it's just something we say. It's an earth to collection system back in and do it again process. So all forms of energy have trade-offs. That's just the truth. And we can keep telling our kids that there's pretty energy and there's ugly energy, but you know, we're not doing them any favors. Okay, it's not a binary system. And the markets are waking up to this. This is the NASDAQ Clean Edge Green Energy Index. And here's the S&P Clean Index just since 21. And there's the regular S&P. There's a 70% spread as the markets are kind of saying, well, you know, they don't really make that much money without the government subsidies in them. And the ESG craze is kind of fading. Money's billions are being pulled out of that. And that's not all good. I think ESG has some good things to do, but it went too far. Green funds in Europe are under the guillotine. The truth about net zero at last, and this is the Wall Street Journal, but voters are realizing the costs. And even the Economist said there's a backlash against politics. I say even the Economist. I love the magazine, but it's gone climate crazy, in my opinion. And JP Morgan, State Street, this is just last, a month in February, backed out of some of these big climate groups, and they're big companies. So solar and wind reduce emissions, but they are less reliable, they're more expensive, and they impact the land. There are trade-offs here as we think through it. And I'm not anti-solar and wind. I get, I put it in. I get, in the same week, I got contacted, let's say, accused of being an oil industry shill, and the same, a climate apologist. So whatever, I guess when I'm just confusing or confused. And finally, nuclear, we built a lot in the US back in the 60s and 70s. Took 5 to 10 years per plant to build them. That's time across the bottom. And 3 Mile Island happened and we stopped. And we were mining our own, producing our own uranium oxides, and we stopped that too after 3 Mile Island and just began importing all the uranium for our nuclear. A remarkable shift. And then France continued until Chernobyl, and France had built quite a bit. About 80% of what they need for power. Korea built, and then Fukushima Daiichi happened pretty close to them, and then China just kept building and continues to build nuclear. So nuclear in many ways today is an Asian story. And in fact, China and Russia are building 70% of new nuclear power plants. I'm talking about the big ones, the gigawatt jobbers. Now, small modular reactors could change that. You're starting to see a lot of appetite for nuclear in the US again. I hope that translates to action. And the NRC doing what it needs to do, but then get the hell out of the way so you can actually build them without spending 15 years in courts over that, because we need that electricity. So you put all that together in the world, and the emissions look like this by region. Flat in the rich world, and we doubled our economy in that period of time. And Asia has gone way up in emissions, and the rest of the world is just getting started. So Asia produces more CO2 than the rest of the world combined today. That's just the data. And they do it because of this. Above the red line, countries consume more stuff than we produce, and below it, they're producers. So the US, we make 5 billion tons of CO2 making our stuff. but we still want more. China makes 10 billion tons of CO2, but they're producers, net producers. Like most of the non-OECD are producers, most of the OECD are consumers, and we're saying, send us our stuff. And this is a really important figure. Asia makes our stuff. And we effectively are saying, produce CO2 while you do it. Use coal, make it cheap, send it to me on an Amazon truck, right to my doorstep. And this is quite fascinating when you think about it in terms of emissions. It's not a zero emission strategy. There's only one atmosphere in the world. And I see a lot of people are saying this now and recognizing it, which is good. I've been talking about this for quite a while. It's kind of a shell game, really. You make our stuff, we'll be green. Countries are doing it, states are doing it, companies are doing it. Intentions might be good. These guys are putting in posts to keep people from parking next to the building. They forgot where they parked. So they're not getting out. And policy can bind us in too. These policy posts, we got to remove them when they're not working and allow that. So how do you do it? How do you reduce emissions? It's a pretty tough combination of tech and scale and price and time frame. All those have to be working together. Natural gas and nuclear replacing coal, that works. It's working here, and it really lowers emissions. Hydrogen, geothermal, many of you are working on some of that. Hydro. I kind of color-coded these by government money versus markets, and it changes with time, potentially. Carbon capture, DAC, direct air capture, nature solutions, solar, wind, and batteries, and efficiency and conservation. A lot of government money being invested in quite a few of these technologies, but these are the big things. These are the levers we can throw to do it. So as I look out into the future, this is a scenario I ran. It's not the truth. It's one of an infinite number. But coal and oil going down, particularly coal out to 2065, gas growing, nuclear growing, hydro growing a little bit, and solar wind growing a lot. That's the actual energy demand. Those are the data to date. That's the slope that it took to get us where we are in the rich world, and the poor world isn't there yet. And I roll that over some with a slowing population growth rate and more efficiency. But this would still be called business as usual by some people. It scares the hell out of them to see that much oil and gas and even coal in 2065. The students especially that I talk with, they think oil and gas are gone in a decade or something. I don't know. This is the winner. If you've ever heard me speak, I have to make myself laugh. This cracked me up. The winner of the last photo taking contest. So, but that's what these young people feel like. Here it is. Is this business as usual? I'm going to take the exact same data. This is in exajoules and make it in percentage. Here we go, left to right. Same data. Now look left to right. The left looks nothing like the right. Okay, you can't even see the COVID dimple in demand. It's there barely. You're cutting coal and oil down from 79% to 32%, 15% gas and nuclear to 38%, and solar and wind and other things going from 6 to 30%. Completely different mix on the right. And the reason is this driver of density, carbon, hydrocarbons, methane, hydrogen, uranium, thorium, is driving us toward that future. I like the right side of that graph, by the way. There's a lot of optionality in it. You have some intermittent stuff with dispatchable to become reliable on the power side. But if you take away, like there's only really 4 things on the left, coal, oil, and gas and hydro. If you take away coal, oil, and gas and nuclear on the right, you have 4 things left now, and they're intermittent. Okay, so that's even less secure than what we had in the past. We've got to have optionality for reliable energy. So I'll kind of start wrapping here with these thoughts. This is our world's income when you fade into the world at night where the lights are on. You can see a remarkable image, first of all, but where are they really bright? In the rich world, right? And here's the energy that we are consuming. The mixes vary tremendously around the world. And when I scale those to be proportional to consumption, Asia consuming almost half the world's energy, making our stuff, and then North America and Europe dominating. But not much diversity in some places. If you take away coal and oil, which a lot of people want to do quickly, and let's get rid of gas because it's a fossil fuel, and nuclear because it's scary, okay? And some people don't even like the hydro because of the environmental impacts. You're left with 6% and nothing in some parts of the world. And I can dim the world's lights by 94% on your screen, I hope, and show you what that will look like. And that's not the future. got to turn them back on. People need the electricity and energy, hunger, clothing, shelter. 1 billion people have nothing. Another billion for education and healthcare, just getting started. Women going for water and cooking with wood indoors, not in the schools oftentimes. Energy tied directly to education and fertility rates and population growth. The migration, immigration away from fear and poverty, overpinned by autocrats, and investing in the environment, and then climate mitigation, adaptation. These are the big issues, and energy really sits under all of those. Secure energy underpins many of these challenges. So here's my dozen hits, if you will, the things we just went through, the 10 or the dozen truths that we just talked about. And I worry, I worry that our leaders and our young people and some of NGOs, et cetera, think we're here today in today's energy world, and we're just going to do this to get to tomorrow. Here we go. We're just going to leap into the future in our flip-flops, and it's all going to be cool. Well, that's not a transition. Now, that's a leap of faith, and if we don't land it, it's over. He landed it apparently, but look, that's just stupid. This would be stupid to do. What is a transition? Well, it's adding energy for a while and reducing emissions. That's about as simple as I could put it there. We've got to do both of these. It's a plus. Okay. So all the ill that is in us comes from fear and the good from love. So what's the answer, Doc? Well, it's not binary. Okay. There are a lot of different components to this that have to be balanced, and they vary tremendously around the world. We know that energy security is vital to all of us, particularly those that are just getting started. It underpins economic security, and that drives environmental security. If we wrap it in fear, which many people are trying to do now, and it's not just on the left or the right, all sectors, we get scared and we start to fight and we divide ourselves. The beginning of wisdom is to do away with fear. So let's kind of end fear, cancel the fear, folks, and realize that the emerging economies need affordable energy, and our developing economies need reliable energy, and our developed need sustainable energy, and we're going that way. The emerging needs to be developing, and developing need to get developed. This is the great challenge. We have to accelerate economic growth. Okay, this is the answer, and it seems counterintuitive, but we need to actually accelerate it, grow the radical middle bigger, so that everybody can begin to flourish, and we end up with human flourishing and environmental impacts going down like they have in the rich world. So that's the framing of a set of answers, and I'll leave you with these final thoughts. You can't negotiate with physics, okay? You can try, but it doesn't work. No one owns the truth. I don't, for sure. We're just seeking it. Science seeks truth. It's never settled. And the divisive binary fear narrative, it's not productive. Canceling. We've got to have civil dialogue. And finally, let's make humility cool again. Let's get a little humble in all this. This is tough problems, and we got to work together on them across the aisle and the bounds. So Bill mentioned we've got films we've made, and a TED talk I gave. And if you haven't seen the PBS series yet, it's streamed. We just finished recording season 5, so there's 60 episodes now. 2 guests. They don't agree on everything. Very powerful. 25 minutes on all these topics. Really fun stuff. We got classroom for kids now. We can talk about that. And here's a short version of this talk. It's like 19 minutes. And then even on Jordan's podcast, which was a fun romp through a bunch of topics, as you might imagine, with Jordan Peterson. So, there's something you can shine your phones on and go to the website and pick up all this free stuff. And I'll stop there. Bill, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, Scott. We're all clapping. You don't hear everyone clapping, but we are all clapping for your talk.
Oh, thank you.
So Bill will talk, but Rosemary has been checking out the chat, and she will be reading questions from the audience. Unless, Bill, you want to say something?
Well, first, I want to say thank you, Dr. Tinker. Of course, as always, you exceeded expectations, and I think if there's one adjective I could use to describe you and your approach is nuance. That the world is not painted in black and white, and looking for silver bullet solutions is never going to work, and that's conveyed in your presentation. If I may, for just 1 second, I'm going to share my screen.
Oh, okay, sorry,
Hopefully,
I'll stop the share. Oh, go ahead.
okay. Just for 1 second, because I hope this, let's see, there it is. I want to just share this one point here, that I hope you can all see. This is Dr. Tinker's resources for us. And this is, I want everyone to go out to switchon.org and look at the TV series and the other great things that he has on his webpage there. And also, I encourage everyone to join the Alliance by subscribing to his newsletter. And also remember that Dr. Tinker's Switch Energy Alliance is a 50c3, which means that if you like his message, and if you want young children to hear a nuanced message about energy, and you don't have the time to go to the school and do it, maybe a good way to do that might be for you to donate a little bit of money to Dr. Tinker's good cause.
Thank you, Bill. That's nice of you to say that. None of that subscription, there's no cost in it, but we love the contributions. It's how it goes. I put money into it too. I don't take anything out, but give it time and money. But it's real people, and they're doing a wonderful job. So I appreciate your saying that. Well, just by the way, Classroom is now we have 9,000 teachers and 80,000 students using it in AP Environmental Sciences in high schools and other classes, and it's just ramping up. So it's a really beautiful platform we developed. My son actually developed, that's bringing this out into the high schools, and we're about to do that in college course as well. So check it out. Love to have you there, and appreciate your support there.
Yeah, we all want to support you, Scott, because you've got a great message that doesn't vilify anybody, just points out the issues that we face, and we need to be pragmatic about it. I believe Rosemary was keeping track.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Rosemary.
Okay, I think this is a really very good, excellent question and very relative to our times. Viewer asked, what is the impact of artificial intelligence on energy demand? It's come out that estimates that it will consume massive amounts of energy for all of the AI generators and computers.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of estimates out there. I don't think we fully know yet, because anytime new technologies, and AI isn't really new, it's pretty cool statistics, but there are a lot better approaches to that now. Massive data crunching needed, and the challenge with AI, as I understand it, my kids are mostly teaching me this because they're all data scientists, is that it self-feeds. So it starts to, as it's doing that, it's consuming more and more energy to address some of these questions that it has and that we have of it. So the latest I've read is that if you do something in Chat GPT and ask it a question, it's about 10x the amount of electricity that a typical Google search is. And Google searches are a lot of electricity. Zooming like we are is a lot of electricity. So there have been forecasts that have gone way high that we could see 20 to 30% increase in power demand from AI alone. And if you add EVs onto that, where's it going to come from? It's particularly if you're going to not allow coal or gas, or build new nuclear. It's kind of a impossible loop. So we'll see where that goes, Rosemary. It's TBD, but I think we know that it will add demand, and that'll vary, unfortunately, where the rich world will probably figure that out, and the poor world. And I don't mean to say rich and poor, it's a continuum, but that kind of get further left behind potentially unless we start to get some energy across the planet so that everybody can begin to benefit from it.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I think this is another good question too, because from all of your talk and everything, it shows that the world is still going to be using a lot of coal for some time. And the question was, is anyone actively trying to make coal cleaner? What kind of research is going on in that aspect?
It's so funny, at the museum talk last night, I saw a guy named Jerry Oliver who was hired by the federal government under George W. Bush to help run FutureGen, which was the clean coal power plant that never got built. Yes, the way to make it cleaner is to take emissions from the stacks and put them away, particularly CO2. That's being done in some places. It's a pre-combustion capture, if you will. So or I mean, a post-combustion capture. So you're trying to scrub it out of the stacks after you've burned the coal. Some of that's being done, but it's expensive. But all the CCS that we're doing the CO2 comes from somewhere. Coal is not the best, most efficient place. I mean, it's better to get it out of natural gas stacks, actually. It's a cleaner stream, or hydrogen plants or cement factories, other industry. But it's being done. You know, I think the clean piece is capturing and storing it. The research there has been great. The Bureau has a wonderful group called the Gulf Coast Carbon Center, been at it for a quarter of a century now. Technically doable. We can put it away at scale. Mostly it's a supply chain and a cost chain there, where all the rent's taken out from capture to supercritical to moving it to injecting it to measuring it or verifying it's there. Who pays? And right now the governments are paying, but they won't always. So I think making coal clean in part is really an answer to, can we do CCS at scale? And a lot of you all are working on that. My daughter-in-law is at Exxon. I think she just moved into that group. She's a geologist out of exploration into that carbon group, and they're really working hard to see if they can do that. But it's a cost. Let's not kid ourselves, and everybody pays in the end, whether it's through federal subsidies and taxes or increase in prices on things. It's an everybody pays model.
Okay, another question, and this question was asked earlier in the chat before, and a lot of your talk really addressed this question. But it was like, how do you balance climate change and the need for humanity's energy needs? And do we need to apologize for producing oil and gas? That's a really, complex question, but
that's the talk I gave last night called the Energy Climate Conundrum. And conundrums are hard problems. They're not easy answers to those. But I think it's doable, but the answer in part is that it's not binary. You have to acknowledge the complexities. It's not simple, but that will help it to be solved. And we can't go too far in any direction. That was my ternary diagram. If you try to go too far on just producing all the energy the world needs, you will make a lot of emissions. If you try to go to net zero in a few years or a decade or ever, you will not have the energy you need. So we have to begin, you just have to balance these and not make the perfect the enemy of the good in this case in order to accomplish it. You do not need to apologize. I hope you never apologize for being in the oil and gas business. In fact, quite the opposite. You're lifting the world out of poverty, have been for a century. So be proud of that, but also be pretty humble about the environmental impacts of it and the need to continue to work to improve those. I think in our regulated world here in the US and other democratic societies, if you will, we're pretty well regulated. I saw recently where BP was being looked at by a Middle Eastern company to be bought wholesale. That'd be interesting, but I think careful what you ask for. If the cheers are going to go up in Europe for that, the oil and gas isn't going to go away, neither is the production facilities. It can be managed by somebody else who may not have the same regulatory systems on them that we do. And so this whole concept that oil and gas is going to go away is a terrifying one to me for a long time, particularly gas. We need it for a very long time, if not ever. And so be proud of what you're doing. Don't be shy. Start with that line, I'm lifting the world out of poverty. What do you do? And that'll kind of begin a dialogue that's quite different from the ones that are commonly had. It is a big question though.
Well, thank you.
Please don't go away. We need you.
And I know how many more questions can you address? Your time is very valuable. And
I'm good. I'm good. I don't want to have people, if you need to peel off folks, I can't see any of you, but don't feel bad. I'm happy to do some more.
Like 64 people that are connected to watching the Zoom meeting.
Sure, I'm happy to keep going.
May I jump in, and Rosemary, can I jump in?
Yeah, and I think Bill he's one of our resident experts, of course, and he's written several articles about energy, and so.
Well, Bill and I have known each other for a very long time. I'm proud to say he rarely admits that, but we go back to the 90s. So
Yeah, we're both slipping logs and finding oil and gas. By the way, I want to tell you a couple of things I know about Scott that most people don't know. One, Scott is a dynamite stratigrapher. And the other thing is that the little known fact that he's actually one of three triplets. His mom had triplets. If you look at his resume, it becomes very obvious that Scott is one of three triplets, because there's no way any human being could do as much as Scott does unless you just don't sleep. I don't know any other answer, Scott.
if there were two more of me, my wife would probably jump off a cliff.
Mine too. Hey, I have a question. This is getting down in the weeds.
Yeah.
I saw a very interesting, a very astute, very erudite, well put together presentation on geothermal, where they were drilling these, it was dry rock geothermal, 14,000-foot laterals where they loop it through. It cost, AFEs were about 14 million, and at the end of it all, they were producing a megawatt. And so the question I have, this is really very arcane, but have you heard of an energy return on energy invested, EROI number for geothermal? Is there? I've been looking for that, and I've never.
Yeah.
I can find them for coal and oil. You dialed in on that.
Right.
Metric?
Right. Yeah. I mean, ERI, for those who don't know, is an interesting metric. There's a lot of assumptions that have to go into it, because it's like life cycle analysis. Where do you start and where do you end for the amount of energy to get to something to extract that? You start with the mining, blah, blah, blah. But they've done some good attempts. Geothermal, I haven't seen great numbers on that, Bill. The hot rocks, the deep stuff is expensive. If you're in Iceland or Southeast Asia or even California, and you got pretty hot water near the surface, it's a lot cheaper. So the ROI there for the headless Helly plant that we filmed in our first film in Iceland is pretty good, because all they're doing is piping steam into a power plant. You don't even have to make steam. You don't have to boil water. It comes out of the earth. So and the wells are shallow. So it depends on your source and how much work you have to do. In Texas, we've got some deep enough wells to get the thermal gradient. In order to make electricity from that thermal gradient, you'd have to re-enter them and do some work and manage that heat, but it could be done. The other kind of geothermal that I like is a very different one. It's kind of the heat pump thing for homes and offices, where you're moving 50, 60-degree water through a system and cooling in the summer and helping to heat in the winter. Again, depending on your price of electricity, what are you competing with? That makes sense in some places. It's not quite as economic in most of the other places. So I think geothermal's day is coming, but if I didn't put it on the energy density, but it would be on the far left end. It's less dense than anything I showed except batteries. It's less dense than dung. The area that you need for geothermal is really vast, as you just said, in order to get that energy out. So there's that calculation that goes into it. Again, but I see it as a piece of a future portfolio in the right places. All these things are resources. So, where's the best geothermal? Hottest water closest to the surface.
Okay, Rosemary, do you have more questions on your list?
Unmute. Yes, it was any comment you haven't, I know there's different ways to combat their climate change, and one of the best things is planting trees. So do you have any comments about, global reforestation on improving the environment?
Yeah.
There was this big worldwide, I think, planting 1 trillion trees in the world.
Right. Yeah. There's deforestation and reforestation both. I think I'm going to start with that deforestation first. One of the great challenges in many of the nations or regions of the world that don't have much energy is they are using biomass for heat and cooking, and often that's wood, either gathered or cut down. So they're limiting in that now. For example, in Nepal, you can't go gather firewood anymore, the people. So Sana Kanchi, who we met, was having to buy it from a local furniture maker, scrap wood, in order to cook a little bit in her home. A lot of deforestation is related to either agriculture, most of it, but also use that way. Reforesting is happening. It makes good sense in places. I certainly am a fan of protecting old growth forests and reforesting where we can. I think there's still a challenge of feeding the world, so we've got to have the agricultural lands. It is a great sink for CO2. Now, eventually those forests die and whatever you've grown falls down and rots, and there you have it. You know, it's a sink up to a point, and then there's only so much you can do. The irony is, and this is pointed out by people all the time, when you look at the world's maps of the world over the last 40 years, we have been greening. There's more CO2 in the atmosphere, from 270 to about 420 parts per million, plus or minus, because of combustion of fossil fuels mostly. And that is food. So we're seeing a greening of lots of parts of the world, not just from agriculture, but also from some ice melt. So that happens to be then a sink for the CO2 that is being put into the atmosphere. A lot of people don't like that because it doesn't help the story and whatever that story is, but that's been happening. Some of that greening isn't healthy. We're seeing some lack of species diversity from the things I've read, because it's really, you're growing things that weren't native or aggressively growing some things and not the diversity, including in the reefs. So that's a challenge. Not all green is good, but like all things, it's sort of complicated. It's a piece of it, though. It's a wedge. I had Nature Solutions in one of my wedges there, and that's what that was. CCS, DAC, and Nature Solutions, if I remember right. So.
This is Gina. I'm going to jump ahead of the line just because I've got to go.
Mhm.
What do you think about, I mean, you just mentioned, the forests die, then, it just dies, blah, 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 blah. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So there's a company that's down in Arkansas that has started this new endeavor where they gather up the droppings of the trees, like dead, corn stalks, et cetera, et cetera. They gather them up. I don't understand the whole thing, and I don't mean to represent them in the wrong way, but they crunch them all up, they process them, they form them into like bricks, and they put them through this process. And I don't know what the process is, but they turn them into something that is like a brick, like you would build a house with. And then what they do is they bury these things in the ground, and they say that they have a 1,000-year lifespan. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I haven't seen that. I'd love to have you send me an article on it. I was laughing because I was thinking of the three pig story, hay and then sticks and then bricks. So your sturdy house. Look, I think, let me kind of comment on a little bit larger scale. We don't do the greatest job of managing our forests in some parts of the country and the world. So forest fires are very complex. We did an episode on it on Switch, on our PBS Energy Switch. Part of it is the warmer it is, the more likely to combust things. But the bigger part was, are you gathering up a lot of the forest trash and fallen stuff like we used to do to keep the campfire from starting? Less so in places. It's not natural. But if you're going to do that, then you have to allow nature to take effect when lightning hits and burn those forests, or they become just giant potential for huge fires. And that's happening with sparks from power lines and, of course, humans with campfires and other things. So I think we could do a better job of managing our forest floors. And if you can do useful stuff with that, I thought you were going to say they're making it into wood pellets and burning it for, homes to heat them, or even power generation, which they do in Europe. That'd be interesting. I think the ROI on that, Bill, by the time you gather all that stuff up and then compress it into pellets and then move it on trucks and then boats and
Well, I
back.
actually do have an opinion on that, Scott.
Yeah.
It's going to be less than 5. You'd be better off. Yeah, it's yeah.
But if you could, if you could keep, if that would also help, to prevent some of the fire capacity, then you might be seeing some double benefits of things. And I like looking at stuff that, where you have multiple components that might be beneficial. And then you can look at.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's fire prevention.
Yeah.
In some cases, we need to leave some of it on the forest floor, you know, for regeneration of the forests. But it should also generate jobs
Mhm.
for people that, you know, need to, you know, cut down or clear, you know, beetle kill forests, etc. The other thing that they're doing is I just talked to them and they said they are now investigating how they can increase the strength of the bricks that they make to where they could be strong enough to build a house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I
Well,
want to say, you know, Gina's had some good questions, but Steve Adcock has just posted a really good question in the chat. It
Mhm.
says, any thoughts on using deep oil and gas abandoned wells to build a closed loop system circulating the water from depth for geothermal use?
yeah, it's a great one. The guy at the Bureau that's running our geothermal program is named Ken Wizian. He's also associate director of the environmental side, but he did his PhD in geothermal back at SMU and ended up being a 2-star general in the Air Force, came back and he's been with us for 4 years now. He's looking at those, Steve, and again, depends on the condition of the well bore, what you have to do to cost to recondition it and get it useful. And then whether or not you have to go down and do some extra enhancement to get, you know, you have to crack the rock in order to get enough circulation of fluids to get that loop system going. But they're looking at that. And it does make sense. It turns out in some of the places, it might not be quite as economic competing with a, you know, couple buck gas to make electricity, et cetera. But if you put it into a portfolio and give value to the diversity of that portfolio or the optionality, then it starts to make sense. And you're not doing anything new, you know, you're not disrupting the environment by building new infrastructure of any kind, et cetera. So I think that and a couple other places for geothermal may be winners. It's going to take some work. It turns out the current Secretary of Energy, who I don't agree with on everything, to put it mildly, but Jennifer Granholm loves geothermal. Okay. Big fan of geothermal and has put a lot of money out there. So I would think industry would want to think about that and how to take advantage of it and bring some of that to good old Texas and the Gulf of Mexico for geothermal use.
Well,
And
listen,
particularly,
I have a-
the other piece on that, if you can use it, if it's near to infrastructure that you could use the power for, you know, that's the nice thing is we're starting to see the ability to co-locate the source of electricity with the demand. And then you don't have to move it on wires. That's why I like small modular reactors. I can put them where I need them and do steady electricity generation. If some of that geothermal were near some of our, you know, our demand centers, whether it's manufacturing of various kinds or cement factories, hydrogen production, et cetera, and I don't have to move it on wires very far or even on a grid. That adds a piece of efficiency that it helps in the economics.
Hey, Scott, I have a question for everyone, and that is, do you have a preferred email? I forgot to get an email from you that you might want to put up. Would it be just to get in touch with you through your switchon.org? That one?
Yeah, you can. I'm unfortunately pretty easy to find, but let me type it in the chat. This is one I use for business.
That'd be a great resource for everyone too. And while Scott's doing that, I want to encourage everyone to go out to switchon.org and sign up for the newsletter, and also give careful consideration to whether or not you want to support the message in the schools to our children that Dr. Tinkter brings to us. If there are no more pressing questions, we've taken a lot of Scott's time. Unless Dr. Tinker, of course, we defer to you. Unless there's a one point you haven't had a chance to in retrospect you want to make, I want to thank you for giving us your time, your knowledge, and for your enthusiasm.
Yeah, thanks. I needed to record you saying Dr. Tinkerbell. It was really, you know, just kind of made me tingle there. But no, look, The one thing I would say, I've gotten engaged with this one group recently, former Senator Landrieu out of Louisiana, the Democratic senator, and then Tim Ryan, a Democratic congressman, both former. And they're trying to work on this coalition that brings natural gas together with solar and wind and others. I think it would be our government doesn't seem to be able to function too well today, especially the federal one, to get along. And industry is going to need to lead this. So I would love to see these partnerships start to form, for example, natural gas, solar and wind. Solar and wind saying, hey, look, we don't make many emissions, but we're not reliable. And gas, you make emissions, but you're reliable. And together, we're a pretty good partnership.
Mhm.
And we need each other. So solar and wind will say, hey, folks out here in our state, let's build some more pipelines. And gas can say, hey, folks in our state, let's build some more power lines because we need that infrastructure. And what I'm describing really is a coalition of partners that isn't competing, but instead starting to do what we know needs to happen, which is add more energy diversity, try to keep the cost down and make it reliable. And if industry forms these partnerships itself, I think governments will follow along. What else are they going to do? So that would be my last thought, is to think about how you might find partners outside of our typical sector and really work those, get the trades to work together. They all have their own trades and the legal side, and get them working together. So that would be a thought I would leave with you. And we're going to need to do that because we don't seem to be building, we don't have the diplomacy, at least currently, in Washington that we wish we had. And by the way, it doesn't exist in many places today. So I leave you with that thought.
That's a good thought to leave us all with. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for attending. I want to thank Dr. Tinker for giving us his time and for the great work that he does every day in, day out. He's producing a balanced message about energy and the practical challenges that we're facing, not the silver bullets that you hear that make the sound bites. Thank you, Dr. Tinker, and I thank everyone for attending. I think at this point we'll close this talk. I hope everyone learned something new from it, and thank you again, Dr. Tinker.